My fiancé spent 6 years shaming me for not being a virgin and demanded I wear red instead of white to our wedding to announce my impurity to 150 guests. When I secretly got everyone to wear red in solidarity, he returned with a firearm, and that's when I discovered the real reason he'd become obsessed with training me. Brian had always been obsessed with virginity so much it was almost creepy. It started when we met. In passing, I said, "My ex liked that band," and Brian's face just crumbled like a cookie. Turns out Brian couldn't fathom that I'd had a high school boyfriend, one boyfriend, who I'd slept with at 18, 3 years before the concept of a Brian even existed. That first year was torture. He'd randomly ask about my ex during dinner, sulk through romantic movies if they mentioned past relationships. Once, mid-makeout, he stopped to ask if I compared him to my ex, which should have been my cue to run. But instead, he'd cry these pathetic tears and swear he'd get over it. "I just need time," he'd say. "I've never felt this way before." So I stayed, like an idiot, thinking love could fix his weird purity complex. By year 2, the comments stopped along with the sulking and questions, which made me think we'd grown past it as we moved in together. 4 years later, he proposed with his grandmother's ring at sunset on the beach, and I said yes to what I thought was a changed man, until a month ago when everything unraveled over wedding dresses. "I was talking to my coworkers," Brian announced during dinner, "and I don't think you should wear white," which made me laugh because I thought he was joking about some wedding tradition, but he wasn't laughing. 2 weeks later, I put down a deposit on my dream dress, a stunning white ball gown with delicate lace, and when I told Brian, he lost his mind. "What color is it?" he demanded, and when I said white, he actually stomped his foot like a toddler before declaring, "You can't wear white because white is for pure women." Pure. That word hung between us like a grenade. 6 years, and we were back to him obsessing over my virgin status like some medieval lord. He wanted me to wear red to announce to our 150 guests that I was some fallen woman who dared to have a life before him. "It's different for guys," he spat when I pointed out his hypocrisy. "Everyone needs to know what kind of woman you are, and wearing white would be deceiving them." He even dragged his mother into it, but instead of taking his side, she suggested he should wear red too, which made him burst into tears because mommy wouldn't help him slut-shame his fiancé. That's when I knew I was done. I'd learned to hide my rage from Brian, but inside I finally accepted he'd never see me as anything but used goods, forever punishing me for not saving myself for someone I hadn't even met. "You know what? You're absolutely right," I told him the next morning, voice dripping sweetness. "I should wear red." His whole face transformed as he actually thanked me for being reasonable and respecting tradition, while I smiled and nodded, mentally orchestrating his destruction. See, Brian had paid for our entire $30,000 wedding to impress everyone, but he couldn't be bothered with actual planning. That was bride stuff. So I made some calls, starting with the wedding planner. We're switching to a red theme, passion red, and Brian's very specific about everyone wearing red for the photos, which didn't even make her blink since she dealt with stranger requests from tech money. Then I called every single guest to tell them Brian decided on a cohesive color scheme and he'll be so hurt if anyone wears other colors, making sure my bridesmaids and both families got the red memo while telling them to keep it secret as a surprise for how amazing the photos would look. I bought a spectacular red silk dress that cost twice my original, because if I was burning this relationship down, I'd look incredible doing it. I also told the planner to keep Brian facing the altar until I walked out, because he wants the first look moment to be perfect. Saturday arrived like Christmas morning as I got ready in my crimson gown, watching through the window while red-clad guests filled the venue until every single person, from his stick-up her A's Aunt Margaret to my beer belly Uncle Tony, wore red and the entire garden looked like a poppy field. Brian stood at the altar in his black tux facing forward just as I'd arranged, completely oblivious and probably imagining everyone gasping at his Scarlet Woman bride. But when the music started and he turned around, his face went through the most beautiful journey from smug satisfaction to confusion to dawning horror to pure rage because everyone was red. By the time I reached him, he was practically vibrating as he hissed, "What did you do?" And I responded, "Exactly what you wanted," loud enough for the front rows to hear before turning to our guests. Brian taught me about honesty in relationships so honestly, I can't marry someone who thinks my worth is tied to my hymen. The venue erupted in gasps while Brian sputtered and tried to explain, but every word made him sound worse until his own mother stood up and said, "You wanted to shame her? Like some scarlet letter?" He looked around at 150 disgusted faces in red, turned, and literally ran out of his own wedding. But he didn't run away or something. Instead, he ran to his buddy and came back to the wedding 20 minutes later, holding a firearm in the air. The air went ice cold. Every single person froze, red fabric suddenly looking less like celebration and more like targets. My heart hammered against my ribs as Brian stood there, arm raised, metal glinting in the afternoon sun. His buddy stood behind him, face pale and hands shaking. The guy looked ready to bolt but stayed rooted in place, probably too shocked to move. Brian's eyes swept across the crowd, wild and unfocused, before landing on me. "You think you're so clever?" His voice cracked, high and desperate. The hand holding the weapon trembled. "Making everyone wear red? Making me look stupid?" I forced my feet to stay planted even though every instinct screamed to run. Running would make this worse. Instead, I kept my voice steady. "Brian, put that down. Don't tell me what to do." He swung his arm in a wide arc, making several guests in the front row duck. My cousin dropped to the ground, pulling his wife down with him. 6 years. 6 years I wasted on you." His mother rose from her seat, hands extended like she was approaching a spooked horse. "Brian, honey, please. This isn't you. Sit down, Mom." He pointed at her with his free hand. "This is all your fault too. You were supposed to support me." She flinched but didn't sit. Instead, she took a small step forward. "I am supporting you by telling you this is wrong." "Wrong?" He laughed, sharp and bitter. "What's wrong is her lying to me, pretending to be something she's not." I watched his buddy edge backward, clearly wanting no part of this. Good. One less person to worry about. The wedding coordinator had her phone out, probably calling for help, but I caught her eye and shook my head. Adding sirens to this situation would only escalate things. "I never lied to you," I said, keeping my voice calm even though rage boiled in my chest. "You knew about my past from day one. You should have known it mattered." His voice broke on the last word. "You should have known I needed someone pure." My Aunt Margaret stood up then, all all 5 feet of her, red dress making her look like an angry cardinal. Brian Matthews, you put that thing down right now. He swiveled toward her. Or what? You'll tell everyone how disappointed you are? They already know. Look at them. All in red because she manipulated them. No. Margaret's voice cut through the air like a blade. We're in red because you tried to humiliate this young woman, and we won't stand for it. A murmur rippled through the crowd. People started standing one by one. My bridesmaids first, then my family, then his family. Even his golf buddies stood up, faces grim. Brian's eyes darted between them all, and I saw the moment he realized he'd lost. His support system, his audience, his validators, all standing against him in a sea of red. This isn't how it was supposed to go, he whispered, arms starting to lower. I took a careful step forward. No, it's not. You wanted to shame me. You wanted everyone to see me as less than. But all they see is you, Brian, the real you. His buddy finally found his courage and grabbed Brian's wrist, pushing his arm down completely. Come on, man, let's go. Brian didn't fight him. The fight seemed to drain out of him all at once, leaving him looking small and pathetic in his black tux, surrounded by red. His buddy started pulling him away, but Brian twisted back to look at me. I loved you, he said, voice broken. No, I replied, surprising myself with how steady I sounded. You loved the idea of me, the version you created in your head. You never loved the real me. His mother stepped between us then, facing her son with tears streaming down her face. Go, Brian, just go. He stared at her for a long moment before his buddy finally succeeded in dragging him away. We all stood there, 150 people in red, watching them disappear around the side of the building. The silence stretched until my Uncle Tony cleared his throat. Well, that was something. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. People started sitting back down, unsure what to do next. The wedding coordinator approached me, face full of concern. Do you want me to send everyone home? I looked around at all these people who'd stood up for me. My family, his family, our friends, all of them wearing red because I'd asked them to, but staying because they chose to. No, I decided. We have food, music, and a beautiful venue. Let's have a party. Without a wedding? She looked confused. Without a wedding, I confirmed. Call it a freedom celebration. My maid of honor grabbed my hand. Are you sure? We can all go if you need space. I squeezed her fingers. I'm sure. That man stole 6 years from me. He's not stealing today too. The coordinator nodded and hurried off to talk to the DJ. Within minutes, music filled the air. Something upbeat and decidedly non-traditional. Well, Brian really took seeing red to a whole new level here, didn't he? Nothing says I'm the reasonable one in this relationship, quite like showing up to your own wedding with a weapon because everyone wore the color you demanded your bride wear in the first place. People started moving toward the reception area, still looking uncertain. Brian's mother approached me, mascara smudged but chin high. I'm so sorry. I should have done something sooner. I knew he had issues, but I never imagined. It's not your fault, I told her, meaning it. He made his choices. She pulled me into a fierce hug. You're a remarkable young woman. Don't let him make you think otherwise. As she pulled away, more people approached. His Aunt Margaret patted my arm and declared I had more backbone than half the men she knew. My Uncle Tony offered to go have a talk with Brian, which I quickly declined. My parents wrapped me in a group hug that lasted until I couldn't breathe. The reception area looked strange with everyone in red instead of the traditional wedding colors, but somehow it worked. People started laughing, sharing stories, acting like this was just another family gathering. The photographer, bless her, started taking candid shots of people enjoying themselves. You know, my bridesmaid said, appearing at my elbow with 2 champagne glasses, this is definitely going to be a wedding people remember. I accepted the glass and clinked it against hers. Not quite the memories I planned to make. Better ones, she insisted. How many people can say their entire wedding stood up to defend them? She had a point. I looked around at all these people who'd chosen my side without hesitation. Brian had wanted to mark me as shameful, but instead, he'd shown me how many people valued me exactly as I was. The DJ announced dinner was served, and people started moving toward their tables. I noticed several of Brian's relatives deep in conversation, probably discussing what to do about him. That wasn't my problem anymore. I found my assigned table, the one where I should have sat with my new husband, and settled into my chair. My bridesmaids quickly surrounded me, creating a protective buffer of red silk and fierce loyalty. So, one of them said, raising her glass, to the bride who stood up for herself, to the woman who refused to be shamed. Another added, to freedom, I said, raising my own glass. To freedom. They chorused, and we drank. The food was excellent, though I barely tasted it. Adrenaline still coursed through my system, making everything feel surreal. Had that really just happened? Had Brian really shown up with a weapon like some kind of movie villain? You're thinking too hard, my maid of honor observed. I can see the wheels turning. Just processing, I admitted. 6 years, and it ended like this. 6 years of him not deserving you, she corrected. At least now everyone knows it. The wedding coordinator appeared at my shoulder. I hate to interrupt, but there's a small issue. The cake. I laughed. Actually laughed. What about it? Well, it has a bride and groom topper, and given the circumstances, take them off, I decided. Just leave it plain. Or better yet, do you have any red flowers? She smiled. I'll see what I can do. As she hurried off, I noticed Brian's groomsmen at a corner table, heads together in serious discussion. One caught my eye and raised his glass in what looked like an apology. I nodded back. They weren't responsible for their friend's actions. The sun started setting, casting golden light through the red-dressed crowd. In different circumstances, it would have been romantic. Now it just felt like the end of a very long chapter. Dance with me, my maid of honor demanded, pulling me to my feet as the DJ started playing something slow. This is supposed to be my first dance as a married woman, I pointed out. So make it your first dance as a free woman instead. She had a point. We swayed together on the dance floor, and soon other pairs joined us. My parents, his parents, cousins, and aunts and uncles, all dancing in their red clothes like it was perfectly normal. You know what the best part is? My maid of honor whispered. He paid for all of this. The man who wanted to humiliate you funded your freedom party. I hadn't thought of it that way, but she was right. $30,000 for a party where everyone chose me over him. There was poetic justice in that. The song ended and another began. My father appeared, offering his hand. May I? I let him lead me into a traditional father-daughter dance, the one we'd practiced in his living room. He didn't say anything at first, just held me close like he had when I was little and the world got too big. I'm proud of you, he finally murmured. It took courage to do what you did. It took stupidity to stay as long as I did. I countered. Number. His voice was firm. It took hope. hope. Don't let him make you cynical about hope. The dance ended with him kissing my forehead and passing me to my Uncle Tony, who immediately started telling a story about the time he'd punched his sister's ex-boyfriend. Not suggesting violence, he clarified quickly, just saying some people deserve consequences. I danced with cousin after cousin, uncle after uncle. Even Brian's father took a turn. He apologized repeatedly for his son's behavior until I finally told him to stop, that Brian was a grown man who made his own choices. Still, he said sadly, we should have seen the signs. We all should have, I admitted. But we see what we want to see. The cake arrived, now decorated with beautiful red roses instead of the traditional topper. The coordinator had outdone herself. People gathered around as I picked up the knife, alone instead of with a partner. Speech! Someone called out, and others took up the chant. I looked at all these faces, people who'd witnessed my humiliation and chosen to stand by me anyway. What could I possibly say to that? Thank you, I started, voice carrying across the crowd. Thank you for wearing red. Thank you for standing up. Thank you for showing me that I'm worth more than one man's twisted ideas about purity. Applause rippled through the group. I cut the cake, feeding the first bite to my maid of honor instead of a groom. She laughed and smeared frosting on my nose in retaliation. As pieces were distributed, I noticed the crowd had relaxed completely. What had started as a disaster had transformed into something else entirely. Not a wedding, but maybe something better. A declaration of independence. Hey, Brian's mother appeared again, holding a slice of cake. I wanted you to know I'm cutting him off. Financially, I mean. If he wants to act like a child, he can support himself like an adult. You don't have to do that for me, I said. I'm not. I'm doing it for him. Maybe hitting rock bottom will teach him what my parenting apparently didn't. She squeezed my hand and disappeared back into the crowd. I watched her go, feeling oddly grateful. Not everyone got that kind of support from their almost mother-in-law. The party continued as darkness fell. The coordinator had lit candles on all the tables, creating a warm glow that made the red clothes look less jarring. People told stories, shared memories, and carefully avoided mentioning the missing groom. Last dance, the DJ announced eventually. Let's make it count. The opening notes of a power ballad filled the air, and the entire crowd moved onto the dance floor. We swayed together, 150 people in red, united in something I couldn't quite name. Not pity, not sympathy, solidarity maybe. As the song ended, people started gathering their things. Hugs were exchanged, promises to call were made, and gradually the crowd thinned. My bridesmaids insisted on staying while I gathered my things from the bridal suite. The dress I'd planned to leave in hung in its bag, untouched. The shoes I'd bought for dancing sat in their box. The emergency kit my mother had assembled lay unused on the table. All these preparations for a life that wasn't happening. You okay? My maid of honor asked from the doorway. Yeah, I said, and found I meant it. I'm okay. We loaded everything into cars, a strange processional of red-dressed women carrying wedding supplies. As I climbed into the passenger seat of my friend's car, I took one last look at the venue. In a few hours, workers would clear away all evidence of what had happened here, but the memory would linger. Where to? My friend asked, starting the engine. Home, I said. My home, not the apartment I shared with him, my parents' house. She nodded and pulled out of the parking lot. In the back seat, two of my bridesmaids were already discussing the logistics of getting my things from Brian's place. I let their voices wash over me, too tired to participate in planning. The red dress felt heavy now, weighted with everything that had happened, but I'd worn it well. I'd stood in front of everyone I knew and refused to be shamed. That had to count for something. My phone buzzed with messages I didn't read. Tomorrow, I'd deal with the aftermath. Tonight, I just wanted to go home, wash off my makeup, and sleep in my childhood bed where things had been simpler. As we drove through the dark streets, I thought about Brian's face when he'd realized everyone was wearing red. The shock, the rage, the complete incomprehension that his plan had backfired so spectacularly. He'd wanted to mark me as different, as less than. Instead, he'd shown everyone exactly who he was. Thank you, I said suddenly. All of you. For wearing red, for standing up, for everything. Please, my maid of honor scoffed, as if we'd let him get away with that nonsense. Still, I insisted. Thank you. We pulled into my parents' driveway, the porch light on and welcoming. Mom appeared at the door before we'd even parked, still in her red dress, arms already open for a hug. I was home, I was safe, I was free. And somewhere across town, Brian was learning that some stains didn't wash out, the kind that came from showing your true colors in front of everyone who mattered. He'd wanted me to wear red as a mark of shame. Instead, I'd painted his world with it. I'm totally fascinated by how Brian's mom decided to cut him off financially right there at the reception. What made her finally reach that breaking point after years of knowing about his issues? The car ride stretched in comfortable silence as we navigated through familiar streets. My bridesmaids had stopped their planning chatter, sensing I needed quiet. Through the window, I watched the city lights blur past, each one a reminder that life continued beyond the chaos of my non-wedding. My phone vibrated again. This time I glanced at the screen. 17 missed calls from Brian, 43 text messages. I powered it off completely and shoved it deep into my purse. At my parents' house, Mom had already prepared my old room. Fresh sheets, my favorite childhood stuffed elephant on the pillow, even the lavender candle I loved burning during high school finals. Dad appeared with hot chocolate, the kind with extra marshmallows he used to make when boys broke my heart. My bridesmaids helped me out of the red dress, carefully hanging it in the closet. Part of me wanted to burn it, but another part recognized it as armor I'd worn into battle and won. They stayed until I was settled in bed, promising to return in the morning to help retrieve my belongings from the apartment. Sleep came in fragments. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Brian's wild expression, the metal glinting in his hand. But I also saw Aunt Margaret standing up, my Uncle Tony clearing his throat, his mother choosing me over him. 150 people in red, standing together. Morning arrived too soon. My bridesmaids showed up with coffee and determination. We drove to the apartment I'd shared with Brian for 2 years, the place I'd thought would be our forever home. His car wasn't in the parking lot. Good. Inside, everything looked exactly as I'd left it yesterday morning. My coffee mug still sat by the sink. The bed we'd shared remained unmade, but something felt different, like the space itself knew everything had changed. We worked efficiently, my friends packing while I sorted through 6 years of accumulated life. The photos went into a box, though I wasn't sure why I kept them. The jewelry he'd given me went into another pile, destined for donation. I left his grandmother's engagement ring on the kitchen counter with a note that simply said, "This belongs to your family." 3 hours later, my life with Brian fit into 7 boxes and 2 suitcases. We were loading the last box when his car pulled into the parking lot. My stomach clenched, but my bridesmaids immediately flanked me like a protective wall. Brian emerged slowly, looking haggard. His clothes were wrinkled, the same ones from yesterday. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He stopped 10 feet away, hands visible and empty. He started to speak, but my maid of honor cut him off with a sharp gesture. She informed him we were leaving and he should wait until we were gone before entering. His face crumpled, but he nodded and retreated to his car. As we drove away, I watched him in the side mirror, sitting alone in his vehicle. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Then I remembered the weapon, the fear in everyone's eyes, his complete inability to see me as anything more than a possession to be marked. The sympathy evaporated. Back at my parents' house, we unloaded everything into the garage. Mom had cleared space, anticipating this exact scenario. She'd even started researching apartment listings in the area, printing out possibilities and organizing them by neighborhood. The next few days blurred together. I called work, explaining I needed some personal time. My boss, who'd been at the wedding, immediately approved a week off with pay. Word had spread quickly through our social circles. Some people reached out with support, others with barely disguised curiosity about the drama. Brian's attempts at contact escalated. When I kept my phone off, he started calling my parents' landline. Dad answered once, listened for 30 seconds, then hung up and unplugged the phone. Flowers arrived daily, each bouquet more elaborate than the last. Mom donated them to the nursing home where she volunteered. On the 4th day, his mother called my cell from her own number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. She asked if we could meet for coffee. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a small cafe downtown, neutral territory. She looked older somehow, worry lines deeper around her eyes. She'd brought a box with her, setting it on the table between us. Inside were things I'd left at their house over the years. A sweater, some books, photos from family gatherings, but underneath lay an envelope with my name written in Brian's handwriting. She explained he'd written it the night of the wedding, after his buddy had driven him home. She'd found him at her doorstep at 3 a.m., sobbing like a child. He'd stayed with her since then, refusing to return to the apartment. I held the envelope without opening it. She didn't pressure me, just sipped her coffee and waited. Finally, she spoke about Brian's childhood, his father's obsession with purity and proper women, the toxic ideas planted young and nurtured through years of subtle reinforcement. She wasn't making excuses, she clarified, just trying to understand how her son had become someone who would bring a weapon to his own wedding. She'd failed him, she said, by not challenging those ideas sooner, by assuming he'd outgrow them naturally. I found myself telling her about the 6 years of subtle shaming, the comments that seemed small individually, but accumulated into a mountain of judgment, how I'd convinced myself it was just insecurity, something love could fix, how wrong I'd been. She listened without defending him, occasionally wiping away tears. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. She promised to get Brian help, real professional help, not just family talks. She also mentioned she'd spoken to a lawyer about the weapon incident, making sure he understood the legal consequences if he ever did something like that again. We parted with a hug. I still held the unopened letter as I walked to my car. Part of me wanted to read it immediately. Another part wanted to burn it unread. I compromised by shoving it in my glove compartment to deal with later. The apartment search consumed the next week. I looked at 12 places, each one a fresh start waiting to happen. The 13th felt right immediately. Second floor, lots of natural light, a small balcony where I could grow herbs. The landlord, an elderly woman who reminded me of my grandmother, approved my application on the spot. Moving day arrived with an army of helpers. My parents, bridesmaids, cousins, even some of Brian's relatives who'd made it clear they stood with me. Uncle Tony showed up with his truck and a crew of his bowling buddies. Aunt Margaret appeared with homemade lasagna to feed everyone. The apartment filled quickly with donated furniture and new purchases. My old life might have fit in 7 boxes, but my new one expanded to fill the space with possibility. By evening, it looked like home. That night, alone in my new place, I finally opened Brian's letter. His handwriting was shaky, words crossed out and rewritten. He apologized, sort of. The kind of apology that included phrases like, "if you just understood," and "I never meant for it to go that far." He loved me, he claimed, more than anyone would ever love me. I read it twice, then fed it to the flame of my lavender candle. The paper curled and blackened, his words turning to ash. I swept them into the trash and opened windows to clear the smoke. 2 weeks passed in adjustment. I established new routines, learned the neighborhood coffee shop's hours, discovered which neighbor played violin at midnight. Work welcomed me back with careful kindness, everyone clearly unsure how to act around the woman whose wedding had imploded so spectacularly. Brian's contact attempts had finally ceased after his mother's intervention. The relief felt enormous, like removing a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. I could walk without checking over my shoulder, answer my phone without dread. Then came the knock at my door on a Tuesday evening. Through the peephole, I saw a woman I didn't recognize. Young, nervous, wringing her hands. I called through the door asking who she was. She introduced herself as Beatrice, Brian's coworker, the one who'd apparently agreed with him about the white dress. She begged for just 5 minutes of my time. Against every instinct, I opened the door but didn't invite her in. She stood in my hallway, words tumbling out in a rush. She'd been at the wedding, in the back, wearing red like everyone else. She'd watched the whole thing unfold and needed to tell me something. Brian had been talking about the wedding dress issue at work for weeks, but his version painted me as the unreasonable one, the one insisting on white despite his reasonable concerns about tradition. She'd supported him because his story made sense, feeding his conviction that he was right. Seeing the reality had shaken her. The weapon, the rage, the attempt to humiliate me in front of everyone, she'd realized how thoroughly he'd manipulated the narrative, how easily she'd believed his version without questioning it. She apologized profusely, saying she should have recognized the signs. Other women in the office had started sharing their own observations about Brian after the wedding. Comments he'd made about their clothing, their relationships, their worth based on their romantic histories, a pattern emerging that they'd all dismissed individually but couldn't ignore collectively. I thanked her for coming but kept the conversation brief. Her guilt wasn't my burden to absolve. After she left, I deadbolted the door and called my maid of honor, needing to process the encounter with someone who understood. The next morning brought another surprise, an email from my former wedding photographer asking if I still wanted the photos she'd taken. I'd assumed there wouldn't be any worth keeping, but curiosity made me agree to meet her. Brian's mom basically said, "Sorry I raised someone who thinks women are collectible cards that lose value when opened. Nothing says healthy parenting like realizing your kid needs therapy after they bring a knife to church." She'd captured everything, not just the formal moments before chaos erupted, but the aftermath too. The sea of red standing in solidarity. Aunt Margaret's fierce expression as she confronted Brian, my father's protective stance, his mother's tears, the moment I'd decided to have the party anyway. But the most powerful image showed the exact second Brian realized everyone wore red, his face contorted in confusion and dawning horror, while behind him, 150 people stood united. The photographer had titled it, "The Moment Truth Won." I bought every photo, not for nostalgia, but as proof. Proof that I'd stood up for myself. Proof that an entire community had chosen to support me. Proof that Brian's attempt to shame me had backfired completely. Word of the photos spread through our social network. People who'd been there wanted copies, and the photographer asked permission to use some in her portfolio. I agreed, with faces blurred except for mine and Brian's. Let the story spread. Let other women see what standing up looked like. 3 weeks into my new life, patterns emerged. Good days outnumbered bad. I cooked meals for one without feeling lonely. I spread out across the entire bed, chose my own TV shows, hung art Brian would have hated. Freedom tasted like small choices made without negotiation. His buddy, the one who'd grabbed his wrist at the wedding, reached out through a mutual friend. He wanted to apologize in person for his role in enabling Brian. I declined the meeting but passed along my acceptance of his apology. Some conversations didn't need to happen face to face. The apartment slowly transformed from empty space to home. Plants appeared on the balcony, thriving in the attention I could now give freely. I painted one wall a deep burgundy, a color Brian had vetoed in our shared space. Every small act of independence felt like victory. 1 month after the non-wedding, I returned to the venue. Not intentionally, but the road I took to a new hiking trail passed right by it. I pulled over, surprising myself with the need to see it again. The garden looked different without red-dressed guests filling it. Smaller, ordinary, just a pretty space where events happened. A new wedding was setting up, traditional white and pastels everywhere. The bride laughed at something her groom said, both of them radiating joy. I sat in my car watching them, waiting for bitterness or regret to surface. Instead, I felt oddly protective. I hoped their love was real, built on mutual respect rather than possession. I hoped neither of them would ever stand where Brian had stood, weapon raised, trying to control through fear. My phone rang, breaking the spell. Mom, inviting me to Sunday dinner. I accepted and drove away, leaving the venue and its memories in the rearview mirror. That Sunday, surrounded by family still wearing subtle touches of red in solidarity, I felt the shift. The story was becoming past tense. Remember when, instead of can you believe? The sharp edges had worn smooth enough to handle without bleeding. Dad raised his glass during dinner, toasting to new beginnings. Everyone joined in, even the family members who'd initially questioned my dramatic response. Time had proven me right. Brian's actions at the wedding had validated every concern I'd had about his character. After dinner, Mom pulled me aside. She'd heard through the grapevine that Brian had started therapy, both individual and group sessions for men with control issues. His mother was enforcing strict boundaries, refusing to enable his behavior anymore. I felt nothing at the news, not satisfaction, not hope for his improvement, just blank neutrality. He'd become a stranger who happened to know my history. His journey toward being a better person would happen without my involvement or interest. The next week brought unexpected legal documents. Brian was offering to cover all the wedding expenses I'd contributed, plus the security deposit for our shared apartment. His lawyer's letter emphasized this wasn't an admission of wrongdoing, just a desire to facilitate a clean separation. I accepted the money without pride or shame. It went straight into savings, a safety net for my new life. The financial tie severed as cleanly as the emotional one, leaving no remaining connections to untangle. My bridesmaids organized a celebration for my 1-month anniversary of freedom. Not a party, just dinner at my favorite restaurant, the one Brian had always complained was too ethnic for his taste. We ate family style, sharing dishes and stories that had nothing to do with him. Toward the end of the meal, my maid of honor presented me with a gift. Inside the box lay a necklace, a small silver phoenix pendant, rising from the ashes, she explained, though no explanation was needed. I put it on immediately, feeling its weight against my chest like armor. Walking home alone afterward, I realized I'd stopped checking shadows for Brian's presence. The hypervigilance had faded without my notice. The city felt safe again, or at least no more dangerous than it had before him. My apartment welcomed me with the specific silence of a space that belonged only to me. No tension waiting in the corners, no careful navigation of someone else's moods. Just peace, hard-won, and fiercely protected. I made tea and settled onto my couch, the one I'd chosen without considering anyone else's preferences. Through my window, city lights twinkled like earthbound stars. Somewhere out there, Brian was hopefully learning to be better, but that was his journey now, not mine. 6 weeks after the wedding, that wasn't. I woke up without thinking about him first thing. The absence felt like a gift, proof that healing happened in small increments rather than grand gestures. I made breakfast, watered my plants, lived my life. The universe seemed to recognize this milestone, because that afternoon brought a delivery. Not flowers or apologies, but a package from Aunt Margaret. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, lay a vintage red scarf. Her note was brief. Wear it when you need to remember your strength. I draped it around my shoulders, catching my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back bore little resemblance to the one who'd accepted Brian's proposal on that beach. This one stood taller, smiled easier, took up space without apology. My phone buzzed with a text from a coworker. Did I want to join the office happy hour? Brian's name hadn't poisoned my workplace after all. I accepted, adding that I'd be there after stopping home to change. The scarf stayed on as I headed out into my life. Red had become my power color, a reminder that sometimes the best response to someone trying to shame you was to refuse the shame entirely, to stand in front of everyone and declare yourself worthy exactly as you were. Brian had wanted to mark me as impure. Instead, he'd revealed his own stains, the kind that came from trying to diminish another person's worth, the kind that 150 people in red would never forget. I walked into the bar where my coworkers waited, head high and and scarf flowing. Someone complimented the pop of color. I smiled and ordered my drink, settling into conversation that had nothing to do with my past. This was what victory looked like. Not dramatic confrontations or revenge served cold, but ordinary moments lived without fear. Building a life where someone's twisted ideas about purity held no power. Choosing joy despite someone's attempt to steal it. The night stretched ahead, full of possibility. I raised my glass to no one in particular, toasting silently to survival, to support, to the sea of red that had stood when I needed them most. Somewhere across the city, my former wedding venue hosted new celebrations. Other couples pledged forever, hopefully with healthier foundations than mine had. The space had been reclaimed by love, the shadow of Brian's rage overwritten by better stories. I stood frozen in the bar doorway, watching my coworkers through the glass. The red scarf around my neck suddenly felt like a noose, because there, sitting at our usual table, was Brian. My body reacted before my mind caught up, heart pounding, palms sweating, that familiar fight or flight response flooding my system. But this time, I didn't run. I pushed through the door. The conversation died as I approached. My coworkers shifted uncomfortably, clearly unaware of the minefield they'd created. Brian sat perfectly still, gripping his beer with white knuckles. I took the empty seat across from him, movements deliberate and controlled. The others watched us like we were live grenades. Someone mumbled about getting another round and the group scattered, leaving us alone. Brian's appearance had deteriorated further. Patchy stubble, hollow cheeks, clothes that hung loose on his frame. His eyes darted everywhere except my face. I waited, let the silence stretch until it became unbearable. Finally, his shoulders sagged in defeat. He pushed a manila envelope across the table. Inside were documents, the deed to his grandmother's ring, officially transferring ownership to his mother, receipts showing he'd paid off the remaining wedding vendors, a notarized statement taking full responsibility for the wedding incident. But underneath those papers lay something else. Screenshots of text messages between him and someone named Theodore. My blood chilled as I read. Theodore wasn't just a friend. He was Brian's mentor from some online group for traditional men. The messages dated back 2 years, filled with advice about training me, establishing dominance, and correcting modern women's behavior. The white dress hadn't been Brian's idea. Theodore had convinced him it was a test of my submission. The public humiliation was supposed to break me into compliance. The weapon? Theodore's suggestion for reclaiming masculine authority. My hands trembled as I flipped through page after page of manipulation tactics, psychological warfare strategies, and escalation plans. Looks like Brian brought show and tell to the bar meeting, except instead of a cool rock collection, it's evidence of his own terrible life choices. Nothing says sorry, quite like paperwork proving you joined a sketchy internet club for controlling boyfriends. Brian hadn't just been controlling. He'd been systematically programmed by someone worse. I looked up to find Brian watching me, tears streaming down his face. He slid another paper across, this one handwritten. A list of names, 12 other men from Theodore's group, all in relationships, all following the same playbook. The implications hit like a physical blow. How many women were living my story right now? How many were being slowly broken down by partners following Theodore's twisted guidance? Brian's hand moved toward mine, then stopped. He pulled out his phone instead, showing me a recording app. His finger hovered over play. The recording was from a group video call. Theodore's voice dominated, cold and clinical as he discussed deployment strategies for controlling women. Other voices chimed in with success stories about breaking their partner's spirits, isolating them from support systems, creating financial dependence. Then Brian's voice, shaky but clear, telling them about the wedding plan. The group's enthusiastic response made my skin crawl. They'd celebrated his idea, offered refinements, promised to implement similar corrections with their own partners. But the recording continued past the wedding. Theodore berating Brian for failing, for letting me win. The group turning on him, calling him weak, threatening to expose his participation if he didn't fix the situation permanently. That's when I understood. Brian hadn't just brought a weapon to scare me. He'd been pressured to use it. I pushed the phone away, processing this new horror. Brian pulled out another document, this one from the FBI. He'd gone to them with everything. Theodore was under investigation for running what amounted to a domestic terrorism cell, radicalizing men into abusing their partners. The bar noise faded to white static as I absorbed the scope of this. My personal nightmare had been part of something so much bigger, but I caught myself before sympathy could take root. Brian had chosen to join that group, chosen to follow their advice, chosen to try breaking me. He slid one final paper across, a list of the 12 women involved with group members, complete with contact information. He'd compiled it from the group's discussions, cross-referenced with social media. These women needed warning. I pocketed that list. The rest I pushed back toward him. His shoulders slumped further, but he gathered the papers with shaking hands. As he stood to leave, I noticed something. A red ribbon pinned to his jacket. Small, subtle, but unmistakably there. He saw me looking and touched it briefly before walking away. My coworkers gradually returned, full of awkward apologies and questions. I deflected them all, mind racing with this new information. 12 women who needed help, an online predator named Theodore still operating, a network of abuse hiding in plain sight. That night, I started making calls. The first woman, Beatrice's friend from accounting, broke down crying when I explained why I was contacting her. She'd been living with escalating control for months, convinced she was going crazy. The second call went to voicemail. The third resulted in angry denial. The fourth led to a 3-hour conversation that ended with her packing a bag and leaving for her sister's house. By dawn, I'd reached 7 of the 12. 3 were ready to leave immediately. 2 wanted to gather evidence first. 1 was already planning her escape. The last admitted she'd suspected something was wrong, but hadn't known where to turn. My apartment became an impromptu command center. My bridesmaids arrived with coffee and laptops. Mom showed up with sandwiches and her reading glasses, ready to research legal options. Aunt Margaret appeared with a box of burner phones, explaining that her book club had experience helping women leave dangerous situations. We worked in shifts, coordinating safe houses, documenting evidence, creating paper trails. Brian's mother joined us on day 2, bringing financial records showing how Theodore had been profiting from his mentorship program. The FBI contact Brian had provided proved legitimate. Agent Chen listened to our evidence with professional calm, occasionally asking clarifying questions. She couldn't share details of their investigation, but confirmed they were building a case. One by one, the women extracted themselves, some dramatically, publicly, like Beatrice's friend who staged a public breakup at her boyfriend's workplace. Others quietly, slipping away while their partners were at Theodore's weekly strategy sessions. The ninth woman, a teacher named Sarah, brought evidence that changed everything. Her boyfriend had been recording Theodore's sessions for months, planning to blackmail him. The recordings included Theodore bragging about his success rate and discussing plans to franchise his system nationally. We turned everything over to Agent Chen. The investigation expanded. Theodore's digital footprint revealed connections to similar groups across the country, all targeting women through their romantic partners. 2 weeks into this new mission, I realized something had shifted. The red scarf no longer felt like armor against Brian. It had become a symbol of something larger. Every woman we helped was another person refusing to be shamed into submission. The 12th woman proved hardest to reach. She'd gone dark on social media, changed her phone number, seemingly vanished. We tracked her through her sister, only to discover she'd already escaped months ago and was helping other women do the same. She'd been building her own network, identifying victims of Theodore's group and quietly offering support. When we connected our efforts, the scope doubled. 24 women directly affected, with ripple effects reaching dozens more. Brian's intel had been just the tip of the iceberg. Theodore's operation included financial abuse training, isolation tactics, even instructions for avoiding domestic violence charges. The FBI expanded their investigation again. My living room became a war room. Maps marking Theodore's known associates, timelines of escalation patterns, phone trees for emergency extraction. What had started as my personal nightmare had become a rescue operation. Brian sent updates through his mother. He'd entered intensive therapy, moved back to his hometown, started working with a program for reformed abusers. I felt nothing about his progress. His redemption arc wasn't my concern. The women still trapped were. 6 weeks after that bar encounter, Agent Chen called with news. Theodore had been arrested. His computers contained evidence of a nationwide network promoting domestic abuse as traditional values. Hundreds of men had paid for his courses. The arrest made small waves in local news, carefully worded to protect victim privacy. No mention of the wedding incident that had started the unraveling, just a clinical report about an online harassment ring. But in our network, celebration erupted. Women who'd thought they were alone discovered a community. Support groups formed, resources were shared. The red that had marked my humiliation became a badge of survival. My apartment returned to normal. The maps came down, the phones were recycled, the war room disbanded. But the connections remained. A group chat that lit up whenever someone needed help. Monthly dinners where stories were shared and plans were made. I returned to work full-time. The bar incident forgotten by coworkers who'd never understood its significance. Life resumed its rhythm, but with new purpose underneath. Every woman we'd helped was rebuilding, creating lives free from manufactured shame. 3 months after the non-wedding, I stood in my apartment packing boxes again. Not fleeing this time, but choosing. A new job in a new city, closer to the main support network we'd built. The red scarf went into the donation pile. I didn't need armor anymore. The moving truck arrived early. Friends appeared to help, the same ones who'd stood in red at my disaster of a wedding. We worked efficiently, years of practice making quick work of my possessions. As we loaded the last box, my phone buzzed. Another woman reaching out, another story of control disguised as love. I passed her information to the network, knowing she'd find help. The city faded in my rearview mirror as I drove toward my new life. Somewhere behind me, Brian was presumably still working on himself. Theodore sat in federal custody. Dozens of women were discovering they deserved better than partners who saw them as projects to be fixed. My story had started with one man's obsession with purity. It was ending with a network of women refusing to be defined by anyone else's standards. The red wedding had been meant to shame me. Instead, it had lit a fuse that burned through an entire system of abuse. I pulled into my new apartment complex as the sun set. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new women needing help, new battles against those who thought they could control through shame. But tonight, I had boxes to unpack and a life to build. The apartment was smaller than my last one, but full of light. I hung my pictures, arranged my furniture, created a space that was entirely mine. No compromises, no negotiations, no one else's preferences to consider. As I collapsed onto my assembled bed, exhausted but satisfied, I thought about the journey from that beach proposal to here. The woman who'd said yes to Brian felt like a stranger now. That version of me had believed love meant accepting someone's conditions for worthiness. This version knew better. Love wasn't about meeting someone else's standards or proving your value. It was about being seen and accepted exactly as you were. The 150 people who'd stood in red had taught me that. My phone lit up with messages from the network. Women checking in, sharing victories, offering support. I smiled and set it aside. Tomorrow, I'd dive back into the work. Tonight, I just wanted to exist in this space I'd created, free from anyone's judgment but my own. The city sounds outside were unfamiliar but comforting. Somewhere out there were more women who needed to hear what I'd learned. That shame only had the power you gave it. That standing up was possible. That red could be the color of revolution, not submission. I closed my eyes, finally at peace. The story that had started with Ryan's twisted ideas about purity had become something so much bigger. We'd turned his attempt to shame one woman into a movement that saved dozens, and we were just getting started. All right, that flew by quicker than I expected. Appreciate you letting me sneak in some wordplay while you were here. Hope you got a laugh or two. I'll catch you in the next one.